I thought my mother-in-law loved me, until I uncovered the chilling reason she wanted me in the family. When I first met Eleanor, my husband's mother, she wrapped me in warmth like a shawl. She baked banana bread the week before our engagement party and showed up at my work with a bouquet of mismatched flowers because she liked the color of my scarf. Her house smelled like lemon oil and lavender sachets, the kind of smell that made you think of tidy kitchens and polite smiles. My friends said I had a fairy godmother-in-law, and for a while, I believed them. It started small, text messages at odd hours asking how I slept, surprise casseroles on my doorstep, a hand-sewn pillow with our initials sewn crooked in one corner. She called me my girl in a way that felt like a secret code. When she cried at our wedding and told me she was proud, I believed her. Who wouldn't want to believe that someone who was meant to love you actually did? At first, her help felt sweet. She insisted we let her pick the curtains for the living room. Honestly, she chose colors that matched my grandmother's old china, and I liked them. She volunteered to help plan the baby shower before we even told anyone we were trying. And when my mother died the year after our wedding, Eleanor sat with me for hours while I cried and said all the right things. The house felt less empty with her there. But love, I learned, can wear a mask as easily as a friend can wear a smile. The first real crack came 3 months before I found out the thing she had in her attic. We were sitting around her kitchen table, the same table she'd insisted I have for 20 years, and she said, almost matter-of-factly, "You remind me of her." I blinked. "Who?" I asked, expecting some neighbor or aunt. Her hands folded over the teacup. She didn't look at me. "My daughter. She had your eyes." Then she smiled like she'd told a funny secret. I laughed, the polite laugh, the one that fills the space when you're uncomfortable. "I don't think I look like anyone," I said. Eleanor reached across the table and patted my hand. "You don't have to be like anyone when I have you," she said. It should have been a throwaway line. But the way she said it felt like a promise stitched too tight. When I asked my husband, Ben, about it later, he shrugged and said, "Mom always says things like that. She loved my sister so much, she just remembers." Ben's voice had always been a soft harbor. I took refuge in the idea that his mother's past grief was just a quirk. The second crack came one night after the baby shower. I woke to a subtle rustling and the faint pressure of presence in the room, so faint I could have convinced myself it was the house settling, if not for the fact that the bed seemed to dip on the side, where Ben's arm should have been. I turned on the lamp and blinked until the shapes resolved. There in the doorway stood Eleanor. She looked at me like someone who had found a missing thing. "I couldn't sleep," she said, voice low. "I wanted to see you." I remember the cold that spread across my stomach when she stepped closer and whispered, "You look like her when you breathe." I asked her to leave. She did, like a polite ghost. At the time, I told myself the normal things. I was postpartum tired, hormone fog, high stress. But the nights stacked like dominoes. Little invasions. She rearranged the nursery while I was at the market, leaving tiny trinkets placed near the baby clothes. She would pick up my phone and stare at photos, sighing as if she was memorizing a face she couldn't quite remember. She started sending me framed pictures of daughter and mother moments, often choosing old sepia frames that made a woman look like a relic. I thanked her because not doing so felt like slapping her in public. One afternoon, while I was home with our son napping, there was a knock and then a soft scraping on the back door. I opened it to find a small carved wooden box. On the lid was a tiny girl painted in white whose eyes were just 2 little black dots. Inside, a folded note in Eleanor's spidery handwriting said simply, "For when you forget who you are." My fingers closed around the note like it might bite. I put the box in the drawer of the old buffet in the dining room where Grandma used to keep postcards, and tried not to read the words any more than I had to. It took months for me to realize how far Eleanor was willing to go. The first real alarm was finding the photo. I was searching for a receipt behind the stack of recipe cards when a photograph slipped out and fell onto my bare feet. It was of a girl on a porch swing, sundress, gap-toothed grin, hair in 2 braids. The girl looked like me if memory was filtered through a lens. The tilt of her chin, the small dimple. On the back, in that same handwriting, a date was scrawled. My heart stopped. The date was a year before my 32nd birthday. I took the photograph to Ben. He looked at it and then at me, eyes narrowed. "That's Claire," he said quietly. "My sister," he swallowed. He couldn't finish. My throat closed like a fist. "What happened?" I asked. He told me a story in pieces. Claire had been his sister, his mother's eldest, beautiful and sharp and fragile in the way that breaks when you breathe too hard. She had died when she was 23. An accident, the family said. A fall. At the time of her death, Eleanor had been inconsolable, the sort of raw that leaves a permanent bruise. I pictured a young woman and tried to fit that image into the empty space in my head, but all I felt was a hollow where answers should be. The more I probed, the more the family closed around itself. Old boxes were suddenly missing. Ben's calls home grew short and his face tired. People stopped visiting as often, and the subject of Claire became like a bone nobody wanted to gnaw. I tried to be sympathetic, to offer the softness that loss requires. But the air between us shifted. It felt less like we were building a life, and more like I was stepping into one that had already been set. A dining room whose chairs had been arranged without, asking if the guests were still in the world. Then came the attic. It was Eleanor, who suggested I go up and take a look at some of the linens their family was passing down. "There are treasures up there," she said. "I kept everything." We climbed the narrow steps together. The attic smelled like cedar and old paper. The sloped roof carved shadows into odd patterns. Eleanor moved with the careful confidence of someone who knows a house, like the lines on her palm. I followed while she hummed. She told me stories about each chest, how the yellowed lace came from a distant cousin, how the blue quilt was hand-stitched by someone who could count stitches while asleep. In the far corner, half under moth-eaten coats, sat a trunk bound with rusted metal. My fingers hesitated on the lid. "Not that one," Eleanor said softly. "That one's for later." She smiled and continued as if we had not both spotted the small brass plaque, almost hidden where the lid met the wood. On it, a name was engraved, Claire Turner. My breath came shallow. "Why is her trunk up here?" I asked. I expected some sermon, some tidy family explanation. Eleanor's hands didn't tremble. "It's for remembrance," she said. "I keep certain things safe," but she didn't open it. She gently held the lid closed as though the trunk contained something fragile and alive. I wanted to reach out and touch the wood, to smell the must, to find some ordinary object that would make everything true and small. When I did, the lock resisted too easily, and the lid swung wide like a mouth. Inside were letter bundles tied with faded ribbon, a stack of cloth dolls with faces stitched so clumsily they were more pitiful than pretty, and a leather-bound journal the size of my palm. The journal had Claire's name in a tidy hand on the cover. I lifted it and felt as though I had grabbed the throat of the past. That night I read the journal under my kitchen light. Claire's handwriting was bright and messy. She wrote about ordinary things at first, a boy who smiled at the corner store, a dress she wanted. Then the pages changed. The words slanted into darker corners, mentions of checking the mirrors, doing as told, and she said it had to be done. An entry from 2 weeks before her death chilled me. She says daughters are like music to a house. Some notes make it whole, some notes must be played again. The hair on my arms rose. "Must be played again." I read the phrase until it blurred. I put the journal back and tried to sleep. I had nightmares. Claire on the swing, that painted wooden girl staring with her black dot eyes, the carved box opening to reveal a mirror that didn't reflect me but someone else. Each time I woke gasping, I thought of Eleanor on my doorstep watching me sleep. I started noticing patterns. Eleanor chose my clothes for certain occasions, satin, soft whites that clung in flattering ways. She would say, "Claire always looked best in this," and my cheeks would burn. She bought me the same perfume she had saved for Claire. If I protested, she would smile that soft, dangerous smile and say, "Some things are better when you share them." One evening, I found a friend's camera memory full of pictures Ben had never taken. He was labeled as Ben in the metadata, but the metadata can be faked. And the faces in the photos were of me at times when I had been alone. My hair wet after a shower, my sleeping face, the exact arrangement of my hands on a book. It was like someone had been preserving me in pixels, preserving a version of me to keep under glass. When I confronted Eleanor, she cried. "I only wanted to keep her safe," she said. "To have her here again. She was so kind. She loved to be loved. You love so easily, it's a blessing." Her fingers found mine and squeezed as if to anchor me. She had tears, and she had kindness, but there was an undercurrent, like a low electric hum when she spoke. I could